Ça marche?
I think the microphone is working. Hello, welcome for this session on water. Is water good like any other? So to talk about this question, we've got Antoine Frérot, who's the CEO of Veolia, and Mrs. Lagumina, who's a senior partner at Argos Witu. Argos Witu. It's a fund dedicated to the decarbonization of SMEs. I'm going to very quickly introduce the subject. We've got 25 minutes. It's a controversy. What's important is the discussion. So by way of introduction, what we can say is that in France, water is not a rare resource traditionally, but since the beginning of last year, we know that it could become a rare resource. 2022 was a very particular kind of year. We had a drought in summer, winter, autumn. In 100 municipalities in France, the water had to be cut off. And of course, the question comes up in the summer when there's no rain and when we need water for irrigation. So the scarcity of water is beginning to be felt. So just to set the scene and talk about water and the way it's shared, some figures. So in France, about an eighth of water use is consumed. It's not sent back to the natural environment. And among this kind of use, 60% is for agricultural use, so that's quite a considerable amount. 26% goes towards the production of potable water. 12% is for cooling power plants, especially nuclear power plants. So you have these three main types of water use. And the questions that are raised are about sharing. You know, with this increasing scarcity, how do we share the resource that is water? What kind of economic policies need to be set up in a world where scarcity is going to become increasingly considerable? We've seen very well that, you know, you've followed the mega basin crisis. What can we say about this? Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Etc. So I think that Mr. Frérot, well, we've organized the discussion in three phases. In the first phase, we're going to try and define what a common good is. If it's not a resource like any other, what is a common good? What does this imply, considering this water that is becoming scarce as a common good? Secondly, we're going to talk about the governance of this common good that is water. And then we're going to think about technological innovations. Are they going to make it possible for us to solve the problem of scarcity? Mr. Frérot, you have the floor. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So if the question is water a common good? Yes, it is a common good. But it's been a common good for many, many years. In French law, for 30 years now, water bases belong to the nation. Water basins belong to the nation. And in Europe, the European Union has a definition that is very similar to this. This allows me to suggest something. When a company managing water, whether it's private or public, like a water authority, when it invoices use of water to consumers, is it invoicing the property of the nation? No, obviously not. These companies, whether they be public or private, they're invoicing a service relating to water. You know, picking it up, distributing it, purifying it, before sending it back to the natural environment. So it's the service linked to water that is invoiced. It's not the common good itself. So a water company sells services, not water. So the fact, nevertheless, that water is a common good, and in France it's the property of the nation, means that the use of water is necessarily requires public regulation. And conflicts of use, when there are conflicts of use. So the conditions of access to water, whether we're talking about industrialists, private individuals, agricultural people, that's all managed by public policies. So water is costly to transport over large distances, so it's very important to be able to make available water where it is needed. And so water governance is often local. In almost no country is it national. It's local or it's regional and not according to administrative limits, but according to the way it flows into catchment areas, into water basins. So there are two consequences then. It's a public good, and then there's the fact that what is invoiced is not the common good, it's the service, it's the work that goes into delivering water, what the men and women do to deliver that service, and that's what is invoiced. Thank you very much, Antoine. So you've already said everything. So perhaps I'm going to come back to the definition of this common good. Water as a common good, well, water, everybody has to have access to water. This is what the law 2006 said. And this is what the United Nations has said as part of the Water Forum. But it's also a rival good. In other words, when somebody uses this good, some people are actually deprived of that good. So the question that we need to think about today, and you raised this, is that when there is scarcity, when there is a lack of water, how do you organize the rivalry? And this brings us back to the question of governance. Another point that I'd like to add with respect to what Antoine was saying is the fact that water is it's not just the business of water companies. Today, we realize that water is essential. So you had Xavier Pichassi, who was talking about dams, but we can also cite the need for water for cooling power plants. Obviously, and we talked about this, the fact that the water service, this water energy link is very important. There's also the subject of water in agriculture, and I want to continue about that. On the subject that, Kathleen, you talked about, the debate about mega basins, but there's another point that I would like to insist on, and that is the importance of water for industry. You said that you were working with industry. Today we need 600 liters of water for making a kilo of steel, 300 liters to make a kilo of sugar. So we need water. We increasingly need water, and there's a rivalry in terms of water use because we've got this scarcity that we didn't know about a few years ago. I work in Brittany. We're only just beginning to talk about the question of water scarcity. So the subject of governance, that's what it's all about. It's about the rivalry of uses. And then there's the tragedy of the common good, the fact that, because everybody can use the common good, nobody feels responsible to ensure that it's something that's sustainable. And then this question of governance. Yeah, we're going to have to adapt to warming, global warming. The temperature has already gone up by 1.9 degrees in France compared with the industrial area. So we probably need to review the way we produce water, we use water, the way water is distributed and shared. Do we have a future vision of how we're going to go about all of this? Well, since water is a common good, it has to be coordinated by public policies. And when water becomes scarce, increasingly scarce, these public decisions are even more important. These public policies are even more important. It's about regulating access to water for different uses. It's about arbitrating and setting up a hierarchy of uses. And I would say that because water is a common good that is becoming increasingly scarce, that it is increasingly precious, and that it has to be managed with more care. And that's why that, as well as public governance, a good public governance, we need, in order to manage it better, we need more expertise and more professionalism. And that's where companies come in to play. Because paradoxically, it's because water is a common good and a precious common good that we need also to have the expertise of companies that have a lot of experience in this field of water management. Now, coming back to the scarcity that Catherine was talking about, there are different paths that can be explored to face this scarcity. But the first thing is to avoid waste. It's about avoiding waste, about making sure that water is used for a specific use. You know, the drop-by-drop system in agriculture, that allows for savings of natural fresh water. And a good management of water networks with fewer and fewer leaks is also a means of saving water. And beyond the fight against waste, imagine alternative resources. We think about seawater. This is what we, see in countries with not much water. It's very difficult to use seawater. And then there's the idea of reusing water that's already been used. Water has become too precious for it to be used just once, and recycling wastewater for all uses is probably what we will be seeing in the future. So of course, we can't say that we don't need companies because, it's a national pride to have companies that are in charge of water. But if we don't look at things with hindsight and we think about who's going to manage rivalries, if we don't think about it, we're not going to manage things. We need to bring together around the table other players. Legislating, obviously, that's important. We had a specific source water regime. We had a specific regime for distributed water. You are the ancestors of the Roman builders. So these different regimes have changed. And in France, there's a structuring law, the 2006 law. There was another one in 1964. But we haven't had a framework that has really redefined the question of water, probably because we thought that water was still abundant. For 100 years, we've been in a system that made it possible for people to have access to potable water at the right price. Now, the question is much more critical. So, how do we go about this? When we see the attention focused on governance, whether we're talking about the OECD, whether it's big water principles, or whether we're talking about the World Water Forum and the United Nations and what they have done, although there have been a lot of controversies of what happened in March 2022, everybody recognizes that we need a regulation system. Before we regulate, though, we've got to have awareness of these challenges. And in bad French, awareness, in English in the text, means rules that are maybe esoteric. We need reporting. In every company, we need reporting. So alongside carbon, companies are going to have to report on their use of water. We need to be aware of what we're consuming, because if we have data, that will help. The second question is regulation. So there's no water regulator in France. There are lots of municipal water regulators, and we can congratulate ourselves because they're local, and this is what we saw in the last financial report. In France, we have that advantage. Things are local from that point of view. This is what the financial reports say anyway. So the question of what is the right regional level, I come from the world of energy, and I always wonder about interruptibility. In energy, we have to manage interruptibility of different market players. We say, okay, you need to agree not to consume energy during interruptions, and that allows us to balance out the network. But we don't know how to organize that with water. I'd like to come back to the right governance scale. Water is expensive to transport, but with respect to other things, energy, it's easy to store. And so That's why it's necessary to manage it in terms of its use scope. So for the urban environment, it's the catchment area. It's where you have everybody living. If we imagine a big station for managing water with pipes across the county, that would increase the price of water by a factor of 3 or 4. So that's why we need regulations for a local water basin. We need local regulations, which means normally that we have to have the right regulation scale. We need politicians are in the best position to be able to regulate and make decisions about use of water as a resource and define the conditions for accessing water and notably the tariffs, the rates. If I may, we're going to be disrupting discussion. I think it's not just politicians who have to come around the table. We also need to invent things with respect to catchment areas and urban areas. We need to invent ways of managing the controversy. We need to make sure that people in charge of water. So you're talking about representative democracy alongside participatory democracy. You're asking for people in the water world to represent consumers, whoever they are, not just inhabitants. It might be farmers or industrialists. You want them all to take part, perhaps take part in a consultation procedure. I think that we need to ask a question. Do we need clean water to have a shower? Madam, I recommend it very much, yes. Clean water for taking a shower. So the question is, haven't we got too much clean water? Don't we use too much clean water? 20 years ago, many countries in Europe asked themselves whether they could authorize the use of rainwater falling on roofs and, for example, use the water for the flush in toilets. The Dutch did a very serious study on this question, and in 6 months, within the space of 6 months, by using the water from roofs, they saw that there was an increase in gastroenteritis and Legionella disease. So the water that comes from the sky is polluted because it runs off rooftops. And so that's why in France and in Europe, rainwater is not authorized in houses, in homes. It can be used in gardens, it can be used to wash your car, but in households, no, it's polluted. That's why for showers and toilets, it's much better to have clean water. Thank you very much. So I think that the reuse is perhaps the question that we want. The reuse of rainwater is about sanitizing water that's already been used. This is something that's important. We use 0.6% in France when some countries are aiming at 60 or 40%. And let me just talk about this further in terms of use of water in toilets. There's a subject that's very interesting, a study that was launched by the CNRS, the Bergem. It talks about water as a common good. And the way they address the subject is, what do I need? What kind of tools do I need in terms of research so that I have the right markers for this common good that is water? What about governance and other aspects? So it's interesting. It looks about the catchment area approach. It questions that. It questions water rates. But it doesn't talk about public property, water qualified as a common good, a public property. If you have 4 hours, I could explain to you the legal difference between a collective good, a common good, etc. But that there are differences. So this approach is interesting because it's what we want to demonstrate and how we can manage our water better. So recycled water based on wastewater can be completely clean. In Singapore, in order to feed water with ultra-pure water, much cleaner than potable water, Veolia uses water from the sewers. It's waste, it's recycled, and it can be used for showers, most definitely. So it really depends how you take your shower in the morning, perhaps. So a quick question with a very quick answer.
Oui. Il y a une dame qui vous apporte. Oui.
So there's a lady in the front there. Jean-Pierre Darmon, lawyer. You know, recycled water. I think the essential problem to be dealt with today is about recycled water. My question is very simple. In Israel, recycled water represents 90%. And if I get it wrong, you can correct me. In France, recycled water only represents 3%. Why is that? Are we going to take the bull by the horns now so that we've got future solutions for the coming scarcity of water? So it's because we didn't have a problem with water shortages in France up until now. Now we need to tackle the issue. Why? There are other reasons. There was distrust in terms of the sanitary quality of this recycled water. And notably, those in charge of health in the country were afraid that there might be a new scandal, just like there was with mad cow disease. Now, the European Union has decided that recycled water, according to certain standards, is completely healthy. So in other countries applying European rules, they're going to be working on this question. And in France, we're going to be working on it too. We're going to be looking at the use by the population of recycled water. And then there's the anti-waste law of 2022 that makes it possible to go even further today. We've got 150, 160 projects for reuse of water. We think that this is going to be developed further because it's all about, common sense. Do we have time for a question? So I'm sorry, he doesn't want us to have questions. Perhaps we can have a chat outside? Thank you.